It's a good idea to dry the excess fresh flowers that you've got, and you might have been doing that all summer long, just like I have. But what if you've just felt the first chill of autumn and realised that you haven't dried anything at all? Now, I've got some videos up showing what I've already dried, but in this one I'm going to show you the 10 ingredients that are still around, just in case you haven't got any dried flowers for extending your season when all of your fresh ones are done. Sedum, lots of varieties, but I grow Purple Emperor, which is this very saturated red, because the thing is, when you're drying colours, you need them to have some colour so that when they dry, they always fade, and you need them to still have colour in them. Avoid drying sedums that are starting to go a little bit brown, because we are in early autumn, so this is slightly going over. It's a brilliant cut fresh flower, but despite the fact that it feels quite like a succulent, it's a brilliant dried flower. It just takes a lot of time to dry. So with this one, when you cut it, condition it, hang it upside down, and make sure that it's got a lot of space, and give it a lot of time in a very dark environment to retain its colour and to make sure it's really dried properly. Lavender, a classic and perfect ingredient because it also has scent. Now, in early autumn, you might think, gosh, why is your lavender still flowering? Isn't that June? But this is Hidcote and it's newly planted, so it's a little bit all over the place. Plus, I've had the benefit, or not, of the rabbits nibbling it, so it's actually kind of flushed again for lavender. The thing about drying lavender, if you want to use the stems, you have to make sure that you dry it before it's too dry. Otherwise, all that happens is these come off and drop everywhere, and you don't want that. But it's a perfect dried ingredient because of its scent and how it holds its colour. You might have been cutting this ingredient for fresh flowers all summer long, like I have. But right now, when the weather's going to start to close in, now is the time to do a harvest of your Helichrysum. I grow a number of varieties. So Scarlet is a really great saturated, very deep red. Silver Rose is a more pinky colour. But whatever the variety that you grow, they are just perfect dried flowers. They are the classic dried flowers. The thing that's really important with Helichrysum is to condition them when you've cut them and hang them upside down with an elastic band. I never wire my Helichrysum because you really don't need to, and I'm looking to avoid putting anything extra for drying, because I'm trying to make things as sustainable and as biodegradable as possible. What happens with these heads when you condition them is you get the most water with them. Hanging them upside down, gravity eventually makes the stem really stiff, but you have to go through that kind of concerning phase where they all go a little bit weak, but they will stiffen up with a straight stem as long as you use gravity to make sure they're straight. This is one of my top flowers for cutting fresh and dried, but particularly dried, perfect for Whisper It Christmas wreaths. Teasels, they are an absolutely brilliant shape for drying. They're kind of self-drying, if you may, in a way like Helichrysum is. You don't have to worry about them not drying in a perfect shape. Now, a lot of people worry about them getting established in their cut flower garden. Now, it's happened by accident here, but they seem to be able to be controlled. So I'm cautiously optimistic that I'll be able to grow little patches of teasels and then cut them. Frankly, they're only good for Christmas wreaths, and they are just so perfect for that. I think it's worth endeavouring to try and establish a little patch if you haven't got one. They do grow a bit tall, and I don't allow the seed to drop everywhere, but I am just focusing little patches everywhere and then cutting them and keeping them. There's no need to condition these, just keep them and to dry them, and then they will just be such a fabulous globular shape for any kind of dried flower creation. I do love them for Christmas wreaths because when you add pheasant feathers, it's sort of a natural gold palette, to have with these amazing spikes. They are super spiky, but nevertheless a perfect dried ingredient. Amaranthus. This is hot biscuit. This absolutely amazing gold colour. From the other things that I'm drying, you can tell that almost what my Christmas wreaths are going to be focused on, which is a favourite palette, which is gold. So those teasels are gold and amaranthus is gold, and that's a good thing to do. So when you're coming out in early autumn and being attacked by flies, you can cut things for drying that at least you've got half a chance of pulling them together. Otherwise, if you cut this disparate group of things, then you're going to be really struggling to pull together a cohesive piece of dried material. So my amaranthus, truthfully, got a bit mould. So this bed, they absolutely loved it, the moulds. It has some really amazing soil in it, full of worms, and it was like a 5-star hotel. Anyway, we've only got a few of these left, but they are all the more precious, and it's convinced me that growing amaranthus in different colours is a really good thing to do. So I hope you've done a bit better with yours, but it's a great ingredient for drying. XERANTHEMUM. I've grown this for the first time, white and purple, and it's one of those naturally papery petals, so they're kind of virtually dried when they grow on the stem. They are wonderful cut and come again dried flowers. I will be growing so much more of this next year. They're like HELICHRYSUM in terms of you can cut and they keep flowering and flowering and flowering, but this is a brilliant flat-faced shape, so it's good to be able to dry things that give you volume and give you texture, but it's also great to have things that dry that have a very, very different shape to everything else. Plus the colour, I know, really stays, and sometimes growing white things for drying, they just dry and they go to brown and they don't dry white at all. I can absolutely guarantee you that XERANTHEMUM, this white, dries to white, and it looks exactly like that. So if you haven't grown it before, have a think about it, because I'm definitely growing so much more of this next year. Seed heads. So brilliant for texture and unique shapes, and this is Aquilegia. I have loads of it growing everywhere around the garden. It's actually turned brown now and has got mature seeds in it, so now's the time to collect seed from it. But it's also a great one to just collect along with any opium poppies or last minute Nigella seed heads, because you can never have enough of these lovely, voluminous, unique textured seed heads. You may have other ingredients in your garden that you can use for seed heads, but when you are making wreaths, you always need that spike shape. And lots of times flowers are round and flat or globular, but often you run out of spikes, and that's what gives you the direction of travel when you're making things for various ingredients, for crowns, for wreaths, for anything really. So always look out for seed heads. I love Aquilegia. Not an obvious one, but perfect for drying, and a perfect spike, because often you don't have spikes for drying. So CROCCOSMIA, any variety. I've got Lucifer elsewhere in the garden, but if you dry them with the flowers still on, the flowers will dry with that saturated colour. Again, cut the stems, condition them and dry them in the dark, and give plenty of time for them to dry. What you can do is wait for them to get their seed pods on. They're also super interesting because that shape of that spike, you can use it as it is, and it gives this brilliant texture and movement to anything that you're making, even dried flower bouquets. But a lot of people don't dry. I love the old-fashioned name Montbritia, but it is a really, really good ingredient to dry, and it grows like billio. Dahlias are no longer relegated to just being a fresh flower. They can so easily be dried. What I have found is you need to find the varieties that dry best for you, and I like to have colour in my dried varieties, and I found that this one, who actually is the dahlia with no name. If you know the name, let me know. Dries perfectly because I'm looking for a kind of red, quite a red strong colour to dry. So when you do dry them, again I hydrate them and I make sure that they have plenty of air around them, and they basically take weeks because they've got a lot of moisture in them. You need to make sure that you've got all the leaves off the stems, and then after 3 weeks minimum I get a dried dahlia. So I don't heat them or anything, but I just naturally dry them in our very drafty wharf and end up with ingredients that I can add to my Christmas wreaths, my autumn wreaths, and it doesn't waste the crop because dahlias pump out flowers and you don't always use every single one. The key thing is to cut them at their peak and then dry them like that. There's no point drying a dead, awful looking dahlia because guess what? It'll dry looking dead and awful looking. Annabelle hydrangea. Don't you think you can dry it? Because I know you can, but you have to wait until a certain thing happens for it to dry properly. So Annabelle white, as you know, is normally white, but what happens in early autumn is that the heads turn this amazing green, and when it turns green is when you can dry it. You still have to cut it, condition it, and I dry it upside down, and with hydrangeas you kind of just let the water, them suck up the very last bit of water when you're conditioning them, but it's that green colour that gives you the clue that you can dry it. And then there's a really small window when they're that colour and you can get them in before they get rained on or the storms come, or so right now I'm going to be picking these heads for drying, and they will just be really lovely for adding into, whisper it, wreaths for autumn. The thing about ingredients for drying is that it doesn't take too much to think out of the box and have a look around your own garden to see the things that will dry. And if you've never tried to dry them, experiment, because you might be surprised at what you get. So that's it for this video. See you in the next one.